Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. It's Shirley with Spirit of Matter. And we have Algol on the IC. I don't know if she's Minima or not. So let's give some reverence to Beta Per Se with Uranus and Mars applying to it. Let's see if I can get my silly loading while I do this. Almost, yeah. Anyway, that means the midheaven is on 26 degrees Scorpio, with Mars applying to that Uranus in Taurus, so Mars in detriment, and ascendant on 11 Aquarius, ruled by this retrograde Saturn in Pisces in the second house. What I noticed, Mercury is on the descendant. Mercury is in Leo. Mercury is in shade period. And this is going to be very interesting Mercury retrograde because it goes from fire to water and then back. Mercury Leo communicates basically our hearts. So we do wear our heart on the sleeve when Mercury is in Leo, and in Cancer is emo, but it's the emo that needs to kind of come out. Let's talk about. I was pressing record for a reason. Yeah. Yeah. So Mercury is appropriate to talk about more about expandable children and the praxis itself. I have been talking about structures that have been. That's what I wanted to talk about. when I get this withdrawal of, it's like a wave that withdraws from the shore. I know a tsunami is coming because brace yourself. So all the practices that they do to program children and people, but they basically put children in trauma so that they will develop psychic abilities. And you can develop psychic abilities by just practicing yoga, attuning to your body, spending time in nature, learning how to go within, to meditate, then become more and more connected. You don't have to put yourself through shit. Really, it is essentially the lesson from every spiritual shit we go through or life events we go through is that we don't need that to grow. We don't now that Venus is opposing Pluto, okay? We don't need abusive relationships to grow with love. And by the way, I was looking at certain synastry, and it was a Saturn trine Lilith aspect, and I was looking at the kind of cookbook of what Saturn trine Lilith, because we have October, we have a Lilith infused eclipse. But Rahu is going to be on my Lilith, so, and now Saturn is going to go over my Lilith, my Black Moon Lilith. So, what is the four Liliths? That's how it makes sense for those of you who can't compute that. So, what I received was about Lilith feeling safe, being vulnerable with that Saturn, and I'm like, I needed to see that today. So that is basically for the way that you do get to develop psychic abilities or kundalini rise or all these things that sounds very scary, is basically through natural practices that naturally happen to you when you're in good environment. This is when I say housing first in open dialogue, that's what I mean. Think about it. When you're in nature and you're connecting, and you're enjoying the time, you're not stressed over something, then naturally you begin to have these infused experiences where whether you connect with the nature around you or with your own body, or you begin to see things or to sense things, that's a natural way to go. However, the practices of putting people through trauma, children through trauma, so that they will develop psychic abilities, and there's all kinds of all the traumas you can think about, are actually what the practice within the elite is true, but they actually learned from tribal society. So the colonialists that you dislike, that are basically expandable children grown, okay, if you don't like the line of both right and left leaders, um, royal family business people, any public figures that are really public, that are really in the public, have to be associated with secret societies, and they practice those expandable children practices. And because there are various divisions of the expandable children practices, and they're all expandable, those that they later preserve, or so to speak, or put in other programs, are also expandable, because they would look at a certain bloodline, but they have people lined up. And that means that those who practice Society of World Builders, those who practice expandable children, practice expandable people and expandable leaders. I kind of feel like the Petertje episode is going to come up, and I'll just allow things to be if it does. So what I want to say about the structure of how do they develop this practice is basically they learned it from how they trained shaman healers in certain tribes across the globe. So those practices that we don't like, of how they treated children that are whether two spirit or the shaman or the healer, and so on, this is a part of what they do with expandable children. The rapes, the tortures, the making children rape each other, because there's not just one shaman, right? That explains a lot of what I've been through with They Don't Know What's Energy. And then they expected these children to heal others. Okay? It's putting them through a lot of shit and expecting them to heal from that, and then to be healers. I am survivor of such expandable child. Okay, I'm still processing things. It's And I want to remind us all that this is not something that white colonialists started. They acquired this type of practices from the training of shamans and healers in indigenous societies that they don't tell you about. There absolutely are healers that are not expandable children, even in indigenous societies. That being said, what the practices that they put people through, raping each other, battling to death, snuff, with it, and that is perfected to snuff films, and that is perfected to electric shocks, and the as technology arose, then they began to use technology in these practices, which we now call satanic, but they're practiced by the church as well, so this is something that we really need to understand. And yes, it's given Petertje. Let's see if I have the battery for it. I don't. We're gonna try. No, I'm not ready emotionally to speak about this yet. It's a water expandable and cooling episode that needs to be, but I'm not yet ready to talk about this. But I'll leave you with that. I'll leave you with just the understanding that what we don't like, what people say colonizers, those who want to enslave humanity, that also are happening in Congo. It's just that nobody gives a shit because it's Africa. But no, that's that, like, the democide is happening there too. And then on the other hand, because the people are white, and because you think that are the politicians, the business people, the this, the that, we don't get. This is what I recently got: is that the pyramid is a little bit upside down, because the more royal your bloodline is, the more torture you go through, and they rape their own people. Like, this is the dumb fuckery. Okay, it looks like, and it always looks like a company you want to associate with. And that is um and the thing is that we always run to something, so whether it's music or business, okay, or politics for some, okay, if you do entertainment and then you're like, oh, I would like to change this, I would like to change that, okay, then that happens. And I think I mentioned it briefly. If you saw my Twitter, you saw that I posted the Petertje episode for Misdaad Slachtoffer. And this is a 42 years old episode. Is it so? Yes, 82. It's one of the first cases I think that Peter did. And that was a child, 10 years old, named Peter. And that child was very likely kidnapped. We don't know exactly how, into an orange car. Orange, the color of the royal family. Mind you, if you take a look at the colors of cars in Netherlands, you don't see a lot of like flashy thingies, and it's an orange car. And that orange car was driving through JFK Street and Churchill Street. But even before that, Peter began his career by tending to not wanting to put the wrong person on murder in jail. And for the Supreme Court, is that when they practice expandable children, not just tourism inc., it's a position, it's a structure. And when they practice expandable children, which means they rape children and they film it, and a lot of it happen in cars, and for the driver that testified was assassinated. But when Peter just began his career, Peter de Vries, who was tending to cold cases, to murder cases, he was basically tending, that's what I didn't know, to expandable children, by not wanting to put the wrong murderer in jail, which would mean that would expose the right murderer, and that would mean that would be some judge. And so one of the first cases that he gets is, perhaps after tending to that, a child named Peter, 10 years old, is being kidnapped, raped, tortured, murdered in an orange car that drove through JFK, which he would later have the JFK all over his like screen in his future broadcasts. And Churchill, sort of, you don't know who Churchill is today, that was before Geert Wilders even turned to politics. So you could say, oh, that's coincidence. But if you know something about something, you understand that this is the part of how far they would go. Because if you just tend to not put in the wrong person for murder of child in jail, if you just turn to expendable children, they can go all the way for to kidnap a child, to do that to a child. And what it was a child who had two brothers. One of the brothers killed themselves because they blamed the brother for doing that. And then, of course, the misdaadgeslachtver has to look at the case. The journalist name is Peter. The child name is Peter, knowing very well that some judge, some body, some secret society makes sure that this child is kidnapped. And the streets in Netherlands, they're not named JFK and Churchill. That was in Purmerend, and usually it's like, Dutch names. Okay, it's just so. And all these omens, very, very, very clear, are joining together, putting up a scene that would play out, because by the time Peter would go to politics, he would have to defend a judge that did that to children and put other people, maybe or maybe not be seen, in jail for murder of children instead of himself. This is how far they would go, and this is what they did 40 years ago to a person that did tend to expandable children, later targeted individuals, all the things that nobody tended to, all the cold cases nobody tended to, targeted by bloodline, Cassandra. Couldn't say it, but if you understand what is going on, then you do. And of course was eventually assassinated. They took a drug company, basically drug mafia, that may or may not have been vouching for the family. Okay, it was known for the family, but there was state witness that turned to Peter for help because he was the go-to person, and he helped the state witness, and of course that puts him on the assassin list of the family. But who arranged for this scene is another question. And this family was Moroccan, but they were also trading with Israeli mafia, Woodbull. However, we know that his opponent was known with the less Moroccan saying, because he was resisting Islam, and for right reasons, okay, for resisting Ayatollahs, basically. Okay, but that screenplay played out, and this is how far the rabbit hole goes. So I think that should not deter us from tending to expendable children, but should inform us of how far they go, and also inform us that people do tend to that, and people do know about this, even from within the secret societies, because there's no way you could do this show for 40 years and not be affiliated or vouched for. And even from within, they know about this, and they definitely try to tend to that. It's also for we the people to be aware, and this is why I'm making this episode, so that we the people, when we are aware of what's going on, then we don't fall into narrative traps, and we stay we stay put. Okay, if we stay put, we don't fall to these narrative traps. Um, and for the people that manage to escape, if we, yes, can believe them and assist them and understand that they use these practices to put people in trauma, horrid trauma, so that they will develop psychic abilities, we must include both spirit and the matter, not only in cold cases, but when we listen to people and when we believe people, because that's just so. And the more we can put ourselves in better environment. Okay, I just had another kind of a retrograde Saturn and Neptune. I don't know. Palestinians talking about the olive trees and the land, and I'm mentioning that with the Industrial Revolution, people don't know what is the land and the trees, so they don't understand what was the loss because they don't have it. They live in a rented apartment with a mortgage for I don't know how much, always afraid to be evacuated, to be homeless, and not even understanding what is land, what is trees, how to connect with those entities, and other than a runaway trip for where you take the children for a couple of hours, and that's the most. Um, and so there's the pros of the city, but there's also the understanding that there is spirit and matter, and that they have very intricate connection, and we cannot address the world phenomena, whether it's solving crime cases, whether it's medicine, whether it's understanding politics without tending to spirit and matter, um, which is the name of this channel. And when we understand that to be attuned or psychic, it is a natural result of being in a good environment, whereas to be psychotic is a natural result of being going through trauma and in bad environment. This is why I talk about housing first and open dialogue. And this is why when I say Bas van der Kolk, I don't say it to him because he's just a marker of a certain paradigm that previously was Frantz Fanon. If that's what Fanon meant with that, I'm like, no, there's a difference between understanding that people will be violent when they're in bad environment and to encourage them to be violent and to rape people. Yeah, there's a difference between the violence that you need to release yourself from somewhere and rape. I addressed this in another episode. So those things are untangling, and the understanding that these practices, to put these children in these practices, is something that should vanish from the world. Okay, maybe we won't have talented singers like Beyonce, but we will have good singing, and we will have good people, and we will have good economy. And when people practice willing consent and biodiversity, we have enough. It's when this bloodline segregation and eugenics and the overly polarized perception arises from the indigenous tribes, from indigenous practices. Okay, these are the indigenous practices, and Wilders is absolutely right when he talks about abolishing child brides and abolishing treating women like shit, which he cannot talk about this, but is also done in the secret societies, which he was or has to be a part of. Okay, when Malawi chief woman abolished child weddings just recently. So there are things to do to tend to these things. And when I'm telling of the stories of how far they would go, it's more to be aware, and also to understand that the person that you later would see having to defend a horrid sex offender, Joris de Mink, and I believe the victims, even if structurally nobody can look at the case, then structurally there's something here off, because you can change the structure. You can add an unaffiliated person, but you would have to do it outside of the cult, right? So so people would see the later in the years who the person defends, but not see what happened. And you understand that if they do this with what they did to that child, they are not doing other things psychologically, psychically attacking the people who tend to that. And this is why I turned into the Imagination podcast, where people talk about how to tend to psychic attacks, but it's targeted individuals, people who are exposing these programs, where there's GATE, MK Ultra, and so on. But I just call it expandable children, because in the end, they're all considered expandable children, people, and leaders. And this is what we are watching unfolding, okay, right now. And it is that terrible that they would take a child, especially torture them, just to show that if you tend to expandable children, if you tend to put the right people behind bars, which is the judges, the Supreme Court judges, and others, yes, then this is what we'll do to you. You will see that we take this child and we kill it especially for you. Now look, solve the case. And this is a part of the torture that they do to people that are not with the cult, that want to rebel certain parts of the cult. It's not too much to ask. No, enlightenment is a lovely thing when you think about all the teachings and so on, but when you ask for something so simple as to stop the practice of expandable children, stop putting people through torture to get enlightenment, this is where this is what you meet. And this is true to indigenous societies as much as it's true to those who learned from them, which basically became secret societies. They just went and learned and gathered all the information from the tribes. This is how the corpus of knowledge was created, and they copied all the horrid habits, unfortunately, and that's what we call secret societies today. So that's also, if we want to unravel that, we need to Mandela it. Otherwise, you end up very unfree on bed and knee. Yeah, I hope that this is, although it's not easy to watch, it's useful. It's not for nothing that Algol came. It's very likely that Algol is minima today, because it's very likely that it's fated. So yeah, I'll see you in another episode. Bye bye.